For we contend not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spiritual host of wickedness in the heavenly places. From the American Midwest comes This Present Darkness, where we explore the supernatural aspects of the paranormal from a Catholic perspective and expose the dark forces in our world and beyond, both seen and unseen. Now, here's your host, historian, paranormal investigator, author, and ghost lorist, Ursula Bielski.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Ursula Bielski. Welcome to This Present Darkness. For those of you who are new here, welcome, welcome. I am a 35-year paranormal investigator, historian, folklorist, and a lifelong Catholic. And on this channel, we look at everything in the world of the supernatural from a Catholic perspective. I'm so glad you're here tonight. We're going to talk about a subject that just really annoys the heck out of me. And that is the subject of spirit guides, astral beings, space brothers, ascended masters, and all of these other spiritual beings that have been encountered and summoned for almost 200 years now. And they're all supposedly smarter than us, more highly evolved than us, more intellectually and spiritually advanced than us. And they all seem to have the same message, but the message is brought by different looking beings through different kinds of channels that all look a little bit different on the surface, but they're all exactly the same. And it really blows my mind. And it's just infuriating to me that to see people still buying into this trash about these so-called higher beings communicating with us and giving us these crazy messages that have been always the same and always with the same nasty, malevolent undertones, but this sort of loving and kind message on the surface. And always at the heart, anti-Christian every single time. And you look at these people and you think, are you really still not seeing, are you really not seeing that this crap has been being peddled by these entities for 2 centuries and you're thinking it's this new thing? This really got under my skin yesterday because, as you know, I'm really interested in the UFO enigma, this explosion of interest in so-called aliens, extraterrestrials. And I watched this video yesterday that featured a man named Dr. Stephen Greer. And if you're into ufology at all, you know Stephen Greer. He is well known for his films that he's made, including the film Disclosure. He, I guess he worked with at high levels of the government, the CIA, etc. He likes to talk a lot about his achievements. So I'm always suspicious when people do that because you just never know what's for real and what's not. But his whole thing has come to be communication with these extraterrestrials. And he actually has gotten to the point where people pay him and go out into the desert with him or go to like the ocean with him. And he teaches them how to communicate with extraterrestrials. And it's so interesting to me because I guess as time has gone on, maybe perhaps, I don't doubt at all that somebody who is actively trying to communicate with these beings, which, as you know, I believe are demonic, is going to be able to communicate with them. You call up the devil, he's going to answer, and you want to talk to him, he's definitely going to talk to you, and he's going to encourage you to do that as much as you possibly can. So I have no doubt that Dr. Stephen Greer communicates with extraterrestrials, but it's interesting because he has now been accused of fraud. People claiming that he they've paid money to be taken to these locations, and that has been discovered, apparently reported at least, that he had hired planes to shoot flares and things like this. It's like just the right time when they're doing their, big communal thing on the beach or in the desert, so that people would have these experiences of, encountering UFOs. And isn't it funny that it's just like a lot of the spiritualist mediums of the 18th and early 19th centuries who, maybe and probably were legitimately having, presences come forward, not, as we well know, they're not the spirits of deceased humans, but there's something else. So, no doubt many of these early mediums were having real entities appearing and communicating through seances and such. But later on, almost every one of them was accused of fraud. And it's like all of these situations, in the paranormal, where even we see this in poltergeist cases too, that we've talked about, where there's legitimate phenomena in the beginning, and then people resort to fraud later because it doesn't perform, on demand or on command the way that we want it to, or scientific investigators wanted to or expected to. So you see the same thing happening in a spiritualist seance in 1850 that is happening now with these alleged contactees that are actually, Stephen Greer calls it, close encounters of the fifth kind, where humans are actually seeking out contact with and communication with these extraterrestrials. I like to call them ultra terrestrials, like John Keel did, because he did not believe they were space brothers. Oh, that's another term for these beings: spirit guides, ascended masters. Now they're space brothers in the US and the UFO enigma. A lot of these things that, like everything that's demonic, manifestations of the demonic, it started with something godly and, something legitimate and holy. And that was the idea of the great cloud of witnesses, the communion of saints, the holy men and women who we know are in heaven because of their godly lives. And so these holy men and women, the saints who have been recognized as such by the church, we ask them to help us in our daily lives. We ask them to inspire us, to guide us, to help us to be holier like they are, or were on earth, so that we can mirror the lives that they led. We don't talk about these saints as ascended masters or spiritually superior to us, as spiritually superior beings. Angels are spiritually superior beings to us, but saints are holy men and women. They're men and women just like us, who by discipline and faith and love transformed their humanity into this wonderful holiness. And, there are our big brothers and sisters. God created human beings because he wanted a human family. Dr. Heiser, the late Dr. Heiser, hammered this home over and over again. And it really woke me up to that reality that God wanted a human family. And yeah, does he need us to go through the Blessed Mother or the saints to get to him? No, he doesn't, but he wants us to. He wants us to have those family relationships. He wants us to be connected to one another. He wants us to help each other. And that's why we have the saints. So many non-Catholics say, why do you pray to the saints? Well, first of all, we're not actually praying to them. We're asking them, to help us grow, to help us get better. And that's why, because God wants us to have those relationships. He wants us to help each other. But anyway, what my point was that this was a goodly and godly beginning to this idea of, ascended masters and spirit brothers, these more spiritually involved beings that guide humanity. But it quickly went downhill because it was not centered on God. It was centered on these other beings. And I didn't even know this. I did a lot of work on this in grad school, the spiritualist movement and the history of parapsychology and spirit communication. But even I had never heard of a man named Carl von Eckarthausen. And he had this idea of a council of light, as he called it. And this was, he believed, a secret communion of living and dead mystics who kind of created this half living, half dead community. So it was half physical, half spiritual community of interconnected people. And I found it so fascinating when I discovered this idea just recently when I was researching this topic for this talk, because we've seen this time and time again in parapsychology and in the history of spirit communication, most notably in recent years with the explosion of interest in electronic voice phenomenon, part of the world instrumental transcommunication movement. And I know in particular, the American Association of EVP practitioners, they, for example, every day, they will at the same time attempt to communicate with spirits on the other side, or, the same people who are trying to build what they call a bridge between our world and the spiritual world. So they feel like they're involved in this project where they are all working together, physical beings on this side, discarnate entities and highly evolved entities on the other side, to build this bridge of communication between our world and the spirit world. And it's very funny because, like I said, you see this all throughout the history and coming right to the present moment with people like Stephen Greer, who's doing the same kind of thing. He's teaching people to, at the same time, every day, attempt to communicate with these extraterrestrials and, make that communication stronger, that bridge stronger. And this helps them to manifest more to us. And you can betcha they're helping something to manifest better to us, but it's not highly evolved beings. It's not our space brothers, and it's not ascended masters. It's something very different. There was another person in the 1800s that was very instrumental in this idea of ascended masters. And that was a guy by the name of Alfred Perry Sinnett, who supposedly channeled this document called the Mahatma Letters in 1881. And in this document, it was revealed that these high-ranking Illuminati around the world, and I think also on the other side, could communicate telepathically, across distance without having to speak or write to one another. And this is an idea that also has come up over and over again, most particularly in the recent UFO enigma phenomena, where to a case, abductees and contactees tell us when they are visited by these so-called aliens that the communication between them and the aliens and between the aliens and other aliens that they encounter is all telepathic. There is no spoken or written communication at all. So we see this very commonly in, like I said, literally every single one of these modern UFO cases. Incidentally, this document, the Mahatma Letters that was channeled, revealed, also introduced the doctrine of reincarnation. So that has been another issue that has been a huge problem throughout all of these spirit communication situations, from spiritualism through Theosophy, which we'll talk about in a minute, and into the modern UFO contactee movement. Where the doctrine of reincarnation comes up over and over again, a doctrine which is highly, highly, highly opposed to Christian beliefs. So all very, very problematic. I had the unique experience when I was in grad school of visiting a variety of different churches, like fringe churches, as part of my studies. And a lot of what I studied was the American religious experience and especially fringe religions, like including UFO religions, which have also exploded in recent years. We're going to do a whole show just about that. But I got a chance to go to a church here in Chicago, which is part of the liberal Catholic Church. It's known as the Liberal Catholic Church. It's kind of funny because it's actually a very conservative church. And I think that, I mean, there's a bishop that said the mass and everyone changed their clothes, like the priest and the bishop all changed their clothes several times during the mass. The mass was like 2 hours long. There was tons of incense, like oppressive amounts of incense, tons of singing and everything like this. And that's because the founder of the religion, a guy by the name of Charles Ledbetter, was a clairvoyant. A clairvoyant is someone who claims to be able to see things and people that we can't physically see. So they might say that they see ghosts, or they say can see a murder that happened, here in my apartment, God forbid, a long time ago or something like that. So Charles Ledbetter was at mass one day and he saw that as the time grew nearer to the consecration of the bread and wine, that time during the mass when the priest says the prayers of consecration that transform the body, the host and the wine into the body and blood of Jesus. He saw that the closer they got to that point, and the more incense was burned and the more singing that was done, the more of these angelic beings gathered around the altar. So he made the connection that the more sort of like pomp and circumstance that was done, the holier the event became. And so the liberal Catholic Church that he founded is very heavy on the ritual and the sacramentals, like incense and candles and things like that, holy water. And so it's fascinating to attend this. And there were only 3 other people at this liberal Catholic Church mass. It's not a very popular denomination, but it was definitely fascinating to see. And Ledbetter was one of the founders of the Theosophical movement, which was a huge influence on American religion and on all of this occult stuff that has developed in the last 150 years, especially in the United States. I mean, there is not, everything that we think of as a cult really has its modern roots in the Theosophical movement. And one of the things that, everything like the ascended masters and all this stuff you find in Theosophy. So the idea of spirit guides and astral beings and space brothers, the extraterrestrial space brothers that are here to help us evolve to a more highly spiritual self. They all have their roots in Theosophy. But one of the things that was really interesting about Theosophy as well is that they put a big emphasis on extraterrestrial beings and extraterrestrial space, especially several different planets, including Mars and Venus. Venus being the most important planet in the Theosophical movement or religion. Now, Ledbetter and his associates who founded Theosophy believed that this being known as the Sanat Kumara descended from Venus, the planet Venus, anywhere from 2 million years ago to 16 million years ago, with a group of characters known as the Lords of the Flame. And Sanat Kumara and the Lords of the Flame are just generally accepted to be Lucifer and the other fallen angels. And so make no mistake when you look at Theosophy, the spiritualist movement, and all of the other occult movements that have grown out of spiritualism and Theosophy, including the contactee and alien abduction movements, that these are all Luciferian religions and movements. And they admit that, because the bottom line in all of these religions is that Lucifer was the good guy. And Lucifer is given a bad rap. Lucifer tried to bring us self-empowerment, knowledge, higher understanding of spiritual things. And also we know, from the book of Enoch and all of that, that he and, all those angelic buddies brought things like warfare, seduction, witchcraft, all that stuff. So again, make no mistake about it, because the practitioners of these religions and movements are making no mistake about it. They are followers of Lucifer. They say that. And all of these beings that they talk about are caught up with that whole Luciferian crowd, Lucifer and his fallen angels. If you know anything about the modern UFO movement, you know that Venus is often cited by a lot of these aliens or extraterrestrials as the place where they come from. And this has been going on for the entire duration of the contactee movement, going back to the 1940s. So Venus is often cited as the connection between their, our world and their world. This does bring up a point that I think is really important. I was talking to my friend Sam Marancho about this the other day, and if you know Sam, you've probably seen him talk at our events in the past. He's been the head of Illinois MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, forever. Such a smart guy, and knows everything about ufology inside and out. And we were talking about, that we really feel that this connection between, the physical world and the spiritual world is something that we've really lost with the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment put this, it just cleaved the two of them apart. And so now we can't understand anything physical to be spiritual, or anything physical to be spiritual, and that this is a real problem for our modern sensibility, especially when we look at things like the UFO enigma, and we look at things which I read about in my book, and we've talked about briefly, like crash material or implants that people suddenly seem to have or do have, and other physical objects that are left behind in paranormal situations, such as, for example, in demonic possession and in the exorcisms. Oftentimes the possession victims will vomit things like nails and broken glass, and even live birds and crazy things like that. There have been so many situations during seances where reports of objects have happened, where objects appear from out of nowhere. And this happens just in poltergeist cases and things like this too. Like, remember our Letters from Hell episode, where we had two different cases where letters were just falling from out of thin air in people's houses, notes and letters. So the connection between the spiritual and the physical is something that or disconnection is something that we invented, during the so-called Enlightenment, which is the misnomer of all time. And we really need to get rid of that idea of that separation if we are going to understand any of this stuff that's going on in the UFO enigma today, because it is very physical, it is very spiritual, and you cannot understand it if you're going to look at it as one or the other. A key element in all of these spirit guides, ascended masters, space brothers, is that they're smarter than us, they're more highly evolved than us, and they are more spiritually advanced than us. And part of their whole message is always a very anti-religion message and an anti-Christian message specifically. You don't see it doing that to other religions. In fact, oftentimes you see incorporated into contactee experiences or like Stephen Greer's thing, where he's actually trying to contact these things, you see that these other religious movements, like Eastern religions, there's elements of them that come up. In the video I saw yesterday, which drove me so nuts, he talked all about with the host about everything that he had done to get this to this point where he's actively trying to get people, as many people as possible, to try to contact extraterrestrials. And it ended with a guided meditation, which was like very, very new agey. And then when it was done, he said, "Namaste." We've already talked about yoga and how problematic yoga is. People think they're doing exercise, but they're actually doing, their poses are actually prayers and worship to these fallen gods that are actually fallen angels, the fallen sons of God that we learn about from the ancient religions, including the ancient books of the Bible. But you don't see elements of Christianity invoked in any of this. In fact, the messages from the so-called extraterrestrials often talk about the idea that Jesus was one of us. Jesus is one of us. He's one of the ascended masters, one of the space brothers. Jesus is an alien an ancient astronaut, or Jesus was created by us. That's another one that comes up a lot. So there's often this kind of message. Very interestingly, too, I want to touch on this very briefly, is that we have started to see a lot of this infiltrate the NDE experience, the near-death experience, where you're seeing a lot of people getting these messages that there's no religion, that Jesus was, just a teacher, one of many, that Jesus is an ultra terrestrial. We start to get a lot of these things referred to that we didn't before in these near-death experiences that people were having, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It was always kind of the same. It was one of two messages, and it was either people had a bad experience, they went to someplace that was like hell, and they learned to change their life around when they came back, or they went to a place that seemed to be heavenly, and they were told it was not their time yet, and they had to go back, but it was a beautiful, happy, wonderful place, but it was not their time yet. So those were the two messages and experiences that people used to have. Now they're having these very strange experiences where they're being told messages that are very similar to what our space brothers and our ascended masters and our spirit guides have been telling us. So you got to be really careful, because these demonic entities have infiltrated. They are infiltrating every kind of level of fringe experience or spiritual experiences that people are having. People are hungry for these experiences, and these entities are ready and waiting to step up to the plate and give you what you want, but it's their version of it. It's not the truth. It is not the true version. And again, this is going all the way back almost 200 years now, when the idea of the communion of the saints and these spiritual little brothers and sisters of ours, of the human family, help us. This idea was perverted long ago by these occult organizations, Luciferian organizations, that have grown to influence so much of Western religion and spiritual exploration in the 20th and 21st centuries now. Something I've also found very just crazy about all of this is, I already mentioned that these beings are always smarter than us, right? They're always like the cream of the crop. They're so smart, they're intelligent. And you saw this in the spiritualist movement starting in the mid-19th century, where oftentimes the spirit guides that would come through, or just, the deceased people allegedly that were coming through as spirits, were scientists. You had Benjamin Franklin was a commonly a spirit that would come through during seances. Henry Ford often later on would appear during seances. And then in recent times, it just blows my mind. You may, if you're familiar with the electronic voice phenomenon movement, and I've talked about it on This Present Darkness before, you may be familiar with a man named Konstantin Raudive, who was one of the early researchers in EVP. And he wrote a book called Breakthrough. I think I showed it to you when we did our episode on the spirit communication tools. And Konstantin Raudive is someone who has, since his death, so he did all of this EVP research during life, right? And then after his death, he has been showing up in seances. He has been showing up on spirit boxes. He's been showing up on ghost hunts. And he shows up a lot as, one of these sort of spirit guides in the world EVP or ITC movement. So his name comes up all the time. And so lo and behold, I'm reading about Whitley Strieber, one of the most famous contactees in the whole alien movement, right? He's the guy who wrote the book Communion many years ago now, huge best-selling, multi-million copy selling book about how aliens came to his cabin in New York and contacted him and took him away numerous times. And he and his wife got way into the occult as a result of these experiences. And now he claims he has a connection with his wife who's passed away. And there's really crazy stuff that's going on with Whitley Strieber. If you're not familiar with him, check out some of his videos. He's got a YouTube series. I think it's called Dreamland. He was really good friends with Art Bell. I think they wrote a book, even wrote a book together. But he's like, to me, he's like the poster child for like why you don't mess around with UFO stuff, because it's so obviously occult. He's like the poster child for what happens to you when you let this stuff get in your head. So I'm reading about him, and I read that so he claims that he has an implant. Okay, I think it's in his ear, and they tried to take it out, and it was moving around as the doctor was trying to take it out. But he claims that the aliens told him that Konstantin Raudive designed this implant that was put in him. So, come on, guys. Okay, so Konstantin Raudive, one of the pioneers of research into electronic communication with the dead, who has been appearing in all of these seances, making phone calls to people and stuff like this after his death. Now he turns up in the world of the contactee experience and the UFO phenomenon, and he's designing implants for the aliens to put into people. So if you still want to believe that the UFO enigma is not connected to this whole occult legacy going back 200 years, you really do so at your own risk. Number one, risk of just looking really stupid, because you can't possibly not see that this is all the same movement. These so-called beings are all the same deceptive beings that have been seen for 200 years in different forms across these different cult activities, movements, and religions that have been started. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at one of the most obvious cases, at least in my mind, of the spirit guide, ascended masters, space brothers deception. So join me right back here in a minute. obvious instances of this is seen in the case of a guy named Billy Meier. Billy Meier, if you don't know about him, is one of the most famous UFO contactees in history. He lives in Switzerland, and he has started his own UFO religion, which we'll talk about on a future show when we do the UFO religion show. And Billy Meier claimed he took all these crazy UFO photos that look like, Flash Gordon videos, from like the 50s and 60s. I think most of the photos that he took were taken during the 70s and 80s, but he claimed that part of all of this amazing ongoing experience that he has had, by the way, he claims that he's like an incarnation of one of these evolved spirit like leaders, including Jesus. So he's like the current version of Jesus. Okay. So it's like different reincarnations of the Jesus figure, and he's the current one. So he claims that during this whole experience that he has had with UFOs, going back so many years now, that there's one particular spirit being that is like his spirit guide, right? And of course, it's a beautiful woman, and she calls herself Semjase. And if you're not familiar with the Bible history and stuff like this, and the history, Book of Enoch and all of those apocryphal books that shed so much light on this kind of stuff in the Old Testament and the New Testament as well. Semjase is the name of a demon, and not just any demon. Semjase was the head of the Watcher Angels. And if you've been with the show any period of time, the Watchers were the angels that were just assigned to watch over humanity by God. But a bunch of them gathered on Mount Hermon, and they decided that they thought human women were very attractive. And they decided that they were going to mate with them, and they were going to leave heaven, which was the place that they were supposed to be. They were going to leave their post, which was to be to watch over humanity, and they were going to have sex with human women and mate with them. And this is how we got the race of giants that we know as the Nephilim. Incidentally, if you guys haven't checked out L.A. Marzulli's YouTube channel, he has a show called On the Trail of the Nephilim, and it is fascinating about all the ancient megaliths and structures that have been found to be all connected all over the world. And it's so fascinating about the history of how, as he believes, they were built by the Nephilim. And it's quite interesting, and he's a great speaker, so definitely check him out. But I digress. So Semjase was the head of the Watcher Angels that came to Earth and mated with human women, and created not only this race of giants known as the Nephilim, but also, of course, this led to the flood and everything else that Jesus came to put back together again. So, everything that we saw fall apart in the Old Testament, a lot of it as the result of the mating of the Watcher Angels with human women. It was this that Jesus came to put back together the human family that God had scattered all over the world after the Tower of Babel. And, it's all an interesting story. Again, if you haven't read Dr. Michael Heiser's book, The Unseen Realm, that I talked about last week, definitely check that out. It lays out the whole story from Genesis all through the book of Revelation. So Semjase is the name given by this female so-called extraterrestrial that had been appearing and guiding Billy Meier in Switzerland throughout all of his so-called UFO experiences. And again, I do not see how people can still fall for this deception. And I think God is giving us so much information and shedding so much light on this subject through much better people than me and much smarter people than me that are are making it very clear and showing us exactly how this has just been a deception that's been going on for literally centuries. And you'll see, you know, whenever you read articles about, you find articles in scholarly journals about all of these sorts of things, and scholars will tell you that that these different incarnations, if you will, in the culture, you know, whether they're spirit guides, ascended masters, space brothers, what have you, that these are, they change because they change to reflect our fears and our hopes and our technology and things like that. I don't believe that at all. I'm a scholar, but I believe that it's the beings that change. They do change to reflect our fears, our hopes, our technology, and our society at the time. So they roll with the changes, and they know what we want. They know, you know, what's new, and they know what we expect. And that's why you're seeing the flying saucers. You know, you're seeing the Tic Tac UFOs. You're seeing the crash material. That's what people want. That's what people expect in our, you know, state of the art modern society. You know, people aren't expecting, you know, a piece of jewelry. People don't want a piece of jewelry to appear on a seance table. That's not what we're into now. We're into UFOs. We're into technology. We're into the exploration of space. We've got missions, the Artemis mission, checking out the moon again, planning, you know, in the next 10 or 20 missions to put people back on the moon. And that's where we are. And they are right with the program, giving us what we want, leading the way with the most state of the art, you know, carrots for us, carrots on a string for us, traps for us to walk right into. So it's really remarkable. It's just so clear when you look at the history that all of these so-called enlightened, evolved, highly, you know, spiritual beings are all the same, and they're all deceptors, they're all frauds, and they're all to be avoided at all costs. So I hope that you have enjoyed this look at the misguided and I hope that you don't become one of them. And I hope if you have been one of them, that you will definitely make your way out of that situation and focus your attention where it belongs. You know, like Doreen Virtue, if I used to read her books, you know, back in the day, she kind of invented the whole angel guide thing. And she's a born again Christian now, and she is on the warpath against the New Age and the occult and tarot cards and angel cards and everything else. And she says, you know, if you find yourself in this position where you are scared of this whole deception that's going on and how huge this UFO deception is, don't be scared. Just get in your Bible and just stay there. Because there you're going to be safe. You're going to know what's going on. You're going to be prepared for whatever crazy nonsense they decide to throw at us next. And we are not going to fall for it. Not going to fall for it. You guys, I'm so happy you've been with me for this look at the misguided. And I hope that you will subscribe to, like, share this episode, whether you're listening on Buzzsprout or whether you're watching on YouTube. And I hope that you will hit that notification bell so that you get notified the next time we have an episode air. So thank you so much for being here with me tonight. Until next time, remember to pray for ghosts. I'm Ursula Bielski.
Thanks for listening to This Present Darkness. The video version of this podcast is available on Ursula Bielski's World of the Supernatural YouTube channel. Be sure to become a subscriber by signing up with Buzzsprout today. And remember to sign up for the World of the Supernatural mailing list at worldofthesupernatural.com for our monthly newsletter and more. And don't forget to support the podcast through Patreon.